Chef James Hemings was the older brother to Sally Hemings and a slave to Thomas Jefferson. During his time, he could have been considered one of the best French-trained chefs working in the Americas and was responsible for bringing various forms of ice cream, meringue, and most famously macaroni and cheese to the American palate. His story was ultimately a sad one, but his impact on the American food identity is something that all chefs working in this country should respect. The man turned down an invitation to be the White House head chef, supposedly because the invitation was not personally written by Thomas Jefferson himself. What a legend. What used to be a dish reserved for the wealthy is now ingrained as one of our nation's most iconic comfort foods. And even though the roots of the dish are Italian and French, we've claimed it as one of our cultural symbols. I think it's important when offering variations on a classic not to come at it with the idea of improving it in any way. There isn't a better way to make mac and cheese. It's just a change. Change in itself doesn't have to be good or bad, but what I ended up with, I liked. There are some things that you may do differently and some things that you don't. You should always salt the water for your pasta, but the pasta you choose is open for discussion. I like using cavatappi for mine. I like to call it swirly mac at home, and if anything, it just makes it easier to eat with a fork. If your pasta is fully done after you boil it, you've gone too far. You're going to bake it after boiling, so you want it to be a little on the harder side to make sure it doesn't overcook in the oven. Expect boiling it for about 8 minutes, but check it after 6 or 7. We want something that's just a little underdone. What we don't want is weak-ass pasta. Another tip is to butter your pasta after it's been boiled. The fat from the butter will coat the pasta and slow down how much water it absorbs from the Mornay sauce. A Mornay sauce is a bechamel with cheese. A bechamel sauce is made from mixing roux with milk. A roux is flour that's been cooked in butter. That's essentially the whole recipe for a basic mac and cheese sauce right there. What I did differently is I added an extra step when making the bechamel. When you make a curry, you gather and grind your spices and then you cook them in an oil or butter to activate them. So that's what I did here. I tossed in some homemade curry powder into the butter and I let it sizzle and activate before adding the flour to make the roux. It's such a small step that I can't really call this a new recipe, but the impact was big enough that I was rather proud of how it turned out. How much curry and what kind of curry you use is up to you. If you use an Anglo blended curry, which is basically any curry powder you find in the store, Muchi and Madras curry work well. Japanese curry, which is not spicy, also works. A couple of tablespoons adds a little something you can't quite put your finger on, but keep adding more if you want that flavor to be more pronounced. I'll admit I added 2 tablespoons to this recipe and I'll probably add 2 more next time. Now when you add the curry to the butter, you're not adding the other seasonings that you normally would to the cheese sauce. If you like adding smoked paprika, pepper, or garlic powder, you should do that right before you mix in the cheese. Some spices need to be cooked to be activated and some don't. The seasonings you normally add to mac and cheese don't really need the extra help. The cheeses I chose for this recipe were also pretty basic. Since I was adding curry, I didn't want to do anything that was too different with the cheese, so I kept it classic with sharp cheddar, parmesan, and smoked mozzarella. You should shred your own cheese, by the way. Pre-shredded cheese have anti-caking agents to keep the shreds apart that might affect how well the cheese melts into your sauce. I like baking my mac in a cast iron skillet because I like the toasted cheesy crust that forms with the cast iron. Whatever pan you choose, be sure to butter it before adding your mac and cheese. Finally, I have a hard time not putting chili oil on everything, but if you have any handy or you've made some from any one of my previous videos, it would be a missed opportunity not to try some with this.